How can we travel back in time? Is there a time machine? Yes, it's DNA. It's ancient DNA.
Scientists opened ancient graves and extracted DNA from ancient bones buried across England, Wales, and the British Isles, and uncovered a secret hidden for thousands of years. For centuries, people believed the English came from Romans, Anglo-Saxons, and Normans. But DNA study pointed to something historians had completely missed. Scientists discovered that nearly an entire population had almost vanished from history. The strongest genetic match did not come from Rome or anywhere most people expected. It came from distant grasslands north of the Black Sea, carried by migrants who changed Britain forever. So, who were the people who left the deepest mark on English DNA? Let's dive in. Ancient Britain transformed. Around 4000 BC, a new chapter began in Britain. Waves of farmers arrived from Anatolia in modern-day Turkey, reaching the islands that would later become England and Wales. They did not arrive as conquerors. They arrived with something far more powerful: seeds, animals, and knowledge that would completely reshape how life worked on these islands. But what makes this arrival so important is what came before them. For thousands of years, Britain was still dominated by hunting and gathering communities. And then, in a relatively short period of time, everything began to change. Forests were cleared on a massive scale. Crops were planted where wild land once stretched for miles. Cattle began to replace hunted game, and slowly, permanent settlements started to appear across the landscape. But this wasn't just a change in lifestyle, it was a complete transformation of civilization itself. Because once farming took hold, something unexpected happened. These small settlements didn't disappear, they grew. Year after year, generation after generation, communities expanded across the islands. New fields spread further into the land, and population networks became more stable than anything seen before in Britain's history. And according to later archaeological studies, this stability lasted for nearly 1,500 years. A long, uninterrupted stretch of continuity in prehistoric Europe, far longer than most ancient societies ever maintained. At the same time, some of Britain's most iconic monuments began to emerge. Stonehenge slowly rose from the earth. Avebury took shape across the countryside. And other massive stone structures appeared across England and Wales, many still standing today. At first glance, this world looks almost unshakable. A civilization growing, stabilizing, and embedding itself deeply into the land. But modern DNA research would later introduce a complication no one expected. When scientists extracted genetic material from ancient remains, they found something strange, something that didn't fully match the archaeological story. Because while these farming communities clearly dominated the land for centuries, their long-term genetic presence in later populations was unexpectedly limited. And that raises a deeper question. How does a population that shapes an entire civilization for over 1,000 years begin to fade from its own genetic footprint? And the answer would lead to one of the biggest population mysteries in European history. Strangers across seas. Beaker people changed Britain long before kings ruled England, yet almost nobody knew their story until DNA uncovered it. Around 2400 BC, strange newcomers reached southern Britain carrying bell-shaped pottery, copper daggers, and sharp arrowheads. Archaeologists had studied these Beaker people for decades, but their true impact remained hidden beneath the soil. They did not arrive to build empires or write records, yet they quietly changed the future of an entire island. Ancient villages continued their daily lives, but history had already begun to turn in a new direction. The stones of Stonehenge still stood, but a silent transformation had already begun. Then modern science entered the story and revealed something almost impossible to believe. In 2018, A research team led by Professor David Reich at Harvard Medical School set out to study ancient migration and understand how populations changed across Europe. The researchers extracted and analyzed DNA from more than 400 prehistoric skeletons buried across Europe and Britain. They hoped to trace ancestry and discover how ancient people moved between lands. What they found shocked even experienced geneticists. Within only a few centuries of arrival, the genetic makeup of Britain changed dramatically. The study showed that nearly 90% of Britain's existing gene pool had been replaced. The people who built Stonehenge almost vanished from the genetic record of later generations. Their monuments survived, but much of their DNA disappeared from history. This became one of the greatest mysteries in European prehistory. Scientists searched for answers, but the evidence refused to tell a simple story. Some researchers suggested disease swept through ancient communities and changed everything. Others believed climate shifts damaged farming life and weakened entire populations. Some experts pointed toward ecological collapse that slowly broke old societies apart. Yet researchers found no strong evidence for a massive violent invasion or sudden destruction. The two groups may have lived beside each other for generations while one population slowly declined and the other grew stronger. The newcomers did not simply settle beside the locals. Over time, they became the locals themselves. Another astonishing clue soon emerged from the DNA evidence and changed the entire investigation. The Beaker people carried a genetic signature, unlike the people who lived in Britain before them. That hidden signature pointed far beyond the shores of England and toward lands few historians had expected. The answer lay thousands of miles away and reached back many centuries before these migrants crossed the sea. The story of Britain was becoming larger than Britain itself. Ancient bones had opened a door into a forgotten world where horse riders once moved across endless grasslands under open skies. The deeper scientists looked, the stranger the truth became. Every discovery pulled the story farther from Rome and closer to an ancient people no one expected to find. Britain's past no longer looked familiar because its roots stretched into distant lands beyond the Black Sea. The next discovery would reveal where these mysterious migrants truly began their journey and why their legacy survived. Horse lords arrive. For generations, scientists followed the trail left by the Beaker people, and that trail led far beyond Britain. The deeper researchers looked, the further back the story reached into human history. Long before England existed, another population was already shaping Europe's future. Around 5,000 years ago, powerful groups lived across the vast Pontic-Caspian steppe, north of the Black Sea. Their grasslands stretched across what is now Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan, forming one of the most important migration zones in ancient history. Historians call them the Yamna culture. Unlike later civilizations, they did not build cities or stone monuments. Their power came from something different: movement. They were among the first groups to domesticate horses, gaining speed and mobility the ancient world had never seen before. They also developed wheeled carts, allowing families and supplies to travel across vast open landscapes. Their dead were buried under large earth mounds known as kurgans, silent markers that still survive after thousands of years. But the most important story was not in their monuments. It was hidden in their DNA. As researchers traced their genetic footprint, an unexpected pattern began to appear. The Yamnaya did not remain in one place. Within a few centuries, their descendants had spread across an enormous region, from Mongolia in the east to Atlantic Europe in the west. Many scientists now believe this movement helped spread the Indo-European languages that billions of people still speak today. And in that process, the genetic map of an entire continent began to change. Over time, groups linked to the Yamnaya mixed with populations near the Lower Rhine, in what is now the Netherlands. There, new blended communities formed, eventually becoming part of the Beaker expansion into Britain. Those same groups later crossed the North Sea, bringing with them ancestry that would quietly reshape the islands once again. At this point, researchers began to notice something deeper in the data. Under the guidance of geneticist Ian Barnes at the Natural History Museum in London, the growing evidence was carefully re-examined. And what they saw was not just migration, but transformation. Traits that are common in England today became more widespread after these movements. Lighter skin became more frequent. Lighter eyes and hair appeared more often across populations. The contrast was striking. The people who built Stonehenge were not the same people who later inherited its landscape. History suddenly felt less familiar and far more complex than previously believed. But even then, the genetic story of England was not complete. Because just when scientists thought they had traced the main source of English ancestry, another layer appeared. A second migration had been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years, and it would force researchers to rethink everything once again. France changes England. Scientists believed they had finally solved the mystery of English ancestry, but history still held another hidden surprise. New DNA studies showed that Britain's story remained unfinished even after the discoveries about the Beaker people and the Yamna. In 2021, researchers published a major study in the journal Nature, changing the picture once again. Their goal was simple: understand how populations moved across ancient Britain and discover whether more migrations had shaped modern people. The research team sequenced the genomes of 793 ancient individuals, increasing the amount of available Bronze Age data by 12-fold. The results revealed a second population shift that had remained hidden for thousands of years. Between roughly 1300 and 800 BC, during the Middle to Late Bronze Age, waves of migrants reached southern Britain from communities in and around present-day France. These arrivals did not storm the island with armies or destroy cities through war. Instead, they slowly entered local societies and became part of everyday life. Another layer of ancestry quietly settled into the land without leaving dramatic records or famous battles. The new findings showed that these migrants eventually contributed roughly half the ancestry of England and Wales, while Scotland remained far less affected by these changes. Scientists found no evidence for a sudden conquest or violent replacement of the population. The story looked much slower and much more human. Professor Ian Armitt from the University of York led the archaeological side of the study and helped researchers understand how these ancient communities interacted with one another. The team wanted to learn how people traveled, settled, and mixed across generations. Their discoveries suggested that traders crossed the English Channel again and again. Families married across communities and raised children together over many centuries. Small groups moved from place to place until the population slowly changed from within. History does not always move with swords and kings. Sometimes it changes quietly through ordinary people building new lives beside strangers. Another fascinating possibility soon emerged from the research. Some scientists proposed that these migrations from France may have carried early Celtic languages into the British Isles. This idea reopened a debate that historians had argued about for many years. The language spoken across Britain may have arrived through gradual contact rather than a single dramatic event. The deeper researchers looked, the more complex the island's past became. Ancient DNA kept revealing that civilizations rarely stay separate forever. People meet, cultures blend, and identities slowly change across generations. By this time, Britain had already been transformed again and again by people arriving from distant lands. Each migration left traces inside the genes of future generations and quietly reshaped the island's destiny. Yet scientists still had one final task before they could understand the full story of English ancestry. They needed to compare every ancient layer together and discover which civilization left the deepest mark of all. The answer would overturn centuries of belief and point far beyond Rome, the Celts, and even the Anglo-Saxons. One ancestry still remains to be uncovered. DNA final verdict. Scientists finally reached the moment they had been chasing for years. After studying ancient bones across Europe and Britain, they began comparing modern English DNA with every ancient population they could test. The goal was simple: but enormous. They wanted to understand which ancient groups left the strongest genetic imprint on England. As layer after layer appeared, the story became far more surprising than expected. The results did not match the names most people learn in school. DNA was quietly rewriting history, one discovery at a time. The first and deepest layer came from Yamna-derived Beaker ancestry. These steppe herders entered Britain thousands of years ago and reshaped the population. Their origins stretched back to the grasslands north of the Black Sea, forming the oldest genetic foundation found in England today. As researchers moved forward in time, the story became even more layered. The second contribution came from Bronze Age migrants who arrived from present-day France between 1300 and 800 BC. Over generations, their ancestry spread widely across England and Wales, becoming part of everyday life. Then came the third layer, much later in history. Anglo-Saxon settlers arrived from regions that are now Denmark and the Netherlands. Genetic studies suggest they contributed roughly 30 to 40% of English ancestry. Their influence was significant, but it was not the beginning, because beneath all of these layers, something unexpected became clear. For centuries, many believed English ancestry began with Romans, Celts, or Anglo-Saxons. But genetic evidence told a very different story. The strongest and oldest signals pointed far deeper into the past, back to the Yamna and their Beaker descendants. This means the foundation of English ancestry was formed thousands of years earlier than historians once thought. What was once seen as the start of English history was actually just the latest chapter. The real story began nearly 3,000 years before it. Horse-riding groups from north of the Black Sea left a genetic legacy that still exists today, carried silently by millions of people who never knew its origin. And in that sense, the past never truly disappeared. It was preserved inside human DNA. History suddenly became something larger, older, and far more interconnected than anyone had imagined. Ancient migrations across distant grasslands shaped lives on islands thousands of years later. Each discovery revealed the same truth. Nations are not built from a single origin, but from layers of forgotten movements across time. And yet one final question still remains. Entire populations seem to have vanished from later generations, even though traces of them still survive in ancient and modern genomes. The stones remained, but many of their builders faded from the record. Scientists now understand that ancestry is not a straight line, but a chain of migrations, mixtures, and disappearances. And perhaps the most unsettling discovery is not who survived in us today, but who didn't, even though their traces still remain. History rewritten forever. For generations, many people believed the English mainly descended from Romans, traditional Celts, or Anglo-Saxons. History books often place the Anglo-Saxons at the center of England's origin story. But DNA evidence revealed a much older foundation hidden beneath those later arrivals. Researchers found that English ancestry formed in layers, with each migration leaving its mark on the people who came after. The first and deepest layer came from Yamna-derived Beaker ancestry. These descendants of steppe herders carried their genes from the grasslands north of the Black Sea into Britain thousands of years ago. Long before written history appeared, they had already changed the future of the island. Another layer emerged from Bronze Age migrants who arrived from present-day France between 1300 and 800 BC. Their ancestry spread through England and Wales and became part of daily life over many generations. Then came the third layer. Anglo-Saxon settlers arrived from regions that are now Denmark and the Netherlands. Studies showed that they contributed roughly 30 to 40% of English ancestry. Their influence mattered greatly, but it did not form the oldest foundation. The strongest and deepest ancestry still traces back to the Yamna and the Beaker descendants who followed them into Britain. This discovery pushed England's origin story back roughly 3,000 years earlier than many people expected. Suddenly, the beginning of the story no longer started with the Anglo-Saxons. It began with ancient migrations from the vast steppe north of the Black Sea. The contrast was remarkable. What people expected and what DNA revealed were not the same story at all. Another powerful realization soon followed. The people who built Stonehenge almost vanished genetically, even though their monuments survived. Their stones still stand across the landscape, but much of their ancestry faded from later populations. This finding showed how migrations can completely reshape a nation over time. It also revealed how fragile human history can be. Names disappear, cultures change, entire populations fade from memory. Yet DNA continues carrying their story forward. Hidden ancestry survives long after civilizations disappear. Millions of English people today unknowingly carry the genetic legacy of horse riding, steppe herders who lived thousands of years ago. Their journey crossed continents, survived countless generations, and remains written inside human genes today. The story of England is not the story of one people. It is the story of many journeys blending together across time. And perhaps the most remarkable lesson of all is that the past never truly disappears. It simply waits beneath the surface until science brings it back into the light. So, in the end, the deepest roots of English ancestry do not lead back to the Romans or even the Anglo-Saxons. They trace much farther into the past, to ancient migrants whose journey began on the grasslands north of the Black Sea. What do you think about this discovery? And if a single finding like this can reshape what an entire nation believed for centuries, what else might still be waiting to be uncovered? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more stories like this. More incredible discoveries are coming soon. Until then, see you next time.